Anyway, thank you for coming. I see many of my former students from the ADR. So thank you so much. Very good to see you. So we have not met yet, and I hope we get to know each other during our session together. It's impossible for me to gauge how many of you have any background in Lurianic Kabbalah, either formally or informally. So if I say Isaac Luria, the breaking of the vessels, how many people have never heard of these terms and don't know what that's about? Okay, true. All right, so I've been a professor of mysticism and Kabbalah at the ADR. I've studied Kabbalah more or less my entire adult life. When I was in college at USC, I had a professor of mysticism who told me he did not understand the Kabbalah, and if I gave the Kabbalah lecture, he'd give me an A in the course. I said, okay. So I went out and read major trends in Jewish mysticism. Right. I would tell you, there are some dense books that are dense, and some dense books that feel like you're reading a detective novel, and you can't put it down. So that's what it felt like for me. When I picked up the major trends in Jewish mysticism, I felt like I discovered the truth. And I just kept having to read and read and read. When I hit the chapter on Lurianic Kabbalah, it was just one of those profoundly transformative moments. I realized, this is my religion. And I already understood the idea that poetry and metaphors name events of the soul. And when certain sets of poetry and metaphor name events of the soul, then the meaning of your own life is brought out. And there's a constant dialogue between the poems and metaphors of the given system and your own development as a human being. So that's the poetic, metaphoric, religious system into which I entered when I was 23 years old. And it's only deepened, all these years. It's only gotten deeper and more beautiful and more astounding every year that I grow, and I continue to study Kabbalah physics every day. When I got after the chapter on the Ari, on Isaac Luria, the next chapter was on Hasidism, and then I understood what Hasidism took from the Ari. And again, if you don't know the Kabbalistic background of Hasidism, you think Hasidism is Buber's Tales of the Hasidim, one has to go into the early Hasidic drashes. They're, like for example, Yaakov Yosef of Bologna and others, they're incredibly erudite. They evince great mastery of rabbinic sources, as well as mystical sources. So the idea that Hasidism was for people who couldn't do Talmudic pilpul, so they did another simple thing instead, it's 180 degrees wrong. These were people who really understood the depths of Lurianic Kabbalah, and in my opinion, the Lurianic Kabbalah were just not working. So what happens when you know you're facing a system that's an extraordinary, profound, transformative system? You're learning the practices, but the practices are not having an effect. So Baal Shem Tov comes along and says, they were good for his time. They're over. I'm going to show you a whole different way to practice Lurianic Kabbalah. I hope I get to it today, which is the Baal Shem Tov's theory of tefillah, which replaced Isaac Luria's very complex Kabbalah that had never worked for me, but the Hasidic approach does work for me. All right, so we're going to go through the Lurianic cosmology, not just Kabbalah. One of the reasons I want to share with you is I teach this to lay people constantly. One might, yes, please.
Do you have more text?
I should have. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Maybe look along with your neighbor. And if you email me, I'll certainly give you email.
I have an extra one of these.
All right. So when I was asked to teach and asked for my topic, I chose this because I've had great success teaching this to lay people for my entire professional life. So one might think Lurianic Kabbalah is too complex for lay people. I think it's worth the effort. So we'll start with the unexplainable, the idea of the Ein Sof, and what people ask me what it means, I simply remember. It's not infinite in extension. I say infinite in extension and infinite in density. Infinite in density, try to imagine an infinitely dense obsidian piece of granite. That's also the Ein Sof. So you get rid of the idea of outer space, and we talk about something so dense that nothing can be created. So when you ask, how can creation happen with an infinitely extensive and infinitely dense obsidian granite? Where is there room for creation? This is the Ein Sof. So, for reasons that different Kabbalistic authors offer, and remember, it's all metaphor, so you're not looking for reasons, you're looking for poetry. This infinitely dense obsidian piece of granite retracts back into itself. Okay? It creates a space. So Tzimtzum does not mean pulling away, it means creating a space. And you can already see the great contradiction in Kabbalah. How does the divine create? By creating non-God space. The Ein Sof, if we conflate the Ein Sof with God, the only way the Ein Sof can create is to create anti-God. So the halal, the open space into which creation can come, is by definition God absent, to a degree. Not entirely, but to a degree. So the world we live in is by definition the God absent world. Now, for people who believe that we used to say man proposes, God disposes, there's something in the sky, running our lives, God's up there, we're down here. For some people that works, I won't take it away from them. But other people feel God is absent. They don't understand their own pain, they don't understand their own suffering, they don't understand the evil in the world. And people say, well, if there's God, and God is all good, how can there be evil? They get tied up in theological knots that can't be resolved. And I said, well, what if that were true? What if the world that we live in is a God-absent world? Now what? So in the God-absent world, of course there's alienation, pain, suffering. Rabbi Finley said it's beautiful, Josh. Of course there's loneliness. This is the God-absent world. So what does the divine do in this called the halal, this empty space? By the word halal both means space, and the halal is a corpse in Hebrew. A fallen soldier, halalim. Why halal? Empty of soul. So when you go into the etymology of halal, it's rather gruesome to think that reality is a corpse, right? Just absent the divine. According to the Lurian cosmology, the Ein Sof then shines in a Kav Ein Sof into the halal, okay? The empty space. Look to the outline here. It's called the halal, the open space. It's also called the tihiru. Like litaher also means to clear out. So it's, as it were, oddly, cleanse of God. Okay. So it's one of those very disturbing metaphors. But there's a rashimu, which means a vapor in Aramaic, like a roshan, an impression. There's a spiritual impression of the divine left behind in the halal. Now, as the Kav Ein Sof comes in, you can see the problem. If the Kav Ein Sof comes in and fills the halal, then we're back to where we began. There is no halal, there is no capacity for creation. And here's where, the pages and pages of how this is worked out. And remember, Luria never wrote anything. There are different recensions of his work. The most popular one is by Chaim Vital, the man with the two same names, Chaim Vital. So he took notes and he wrote down, it's called the Eitz Chaim. I think he could have called it the Eitz Ari, but he named it after himself, or it was named for him. And if you read it, it's so repetitive, trying to understand how this all unfolds. So I'll make it very simple. And the simplicity is somehow this Kav Ein Sof creates vessels to contain the light. See, the light, if it were not, as it were, put into vessels, it would fill the halal, and we're back to no creation, the granite obsidian density.
When you say the light, do you mean the Ein Sof?
It's called the Kav Ein Sof. Yeah, the Kav Ein Sof. Now remember, this is the light before light. So if you look at commentaries on Kabbalah, for example, in the Sulam, Introduction to the Tenth Road, he goes at great lengths to say to the reader, this is metaphor. This is before time, before space. Don't take these words and try to assign anything real to them. And I realize he's writing for people that tend to literalize. Like, for example, it says in Tehillim, in the meditation we put on Talib, that God otet or kasalma. Remember this? God wraps God's self in light. So light is the clothing of God. So this one way to introduce this is clothing of God. So our whole idea of what God is. So what can you detect from clothes? You can detect the shape. Okay? So light helps us understand the shape of God. Now you can't think of that with a prosaic mind. You have to go into poetic consciousness. Rabbi Klein said, think about you. So Abe and Sadie are at their table, and Rajan, what they're talking about, I have no idea. Okay? But there might have been an incipient mystic, Franz Rose in the back room, who said, there's finally a rabbi who gets it. Okay? I mean, we're sort of Hegelian. So I have this fantasy that, oh my God, the rabbi knows Hegel? I'm in. Okay? So on one hand, yeah, this is way beyond most people. But there might be the person in the room that says, wow, you mean you could be a mystic? I don't have to run off to Hinduism or Zen Buddhism to find this kind of teaching. Now, it's a danger because many people will say, I have no idea what you're talking about. There's that incredibly sensitive soul that says, somebody's opening up mystical reality to me. I'm tracking it, and it's happening to me right now. So this is what I've decided to try to balance the two. But sometimes when I give these talks, and I go there when I give the talk, and I go deeper and deeper, and people say to me, you took me with you. Okay? And if you really, really ingest these poetic symbols, and you enter them, and you live this poetry, people will go with you into those deepest spaces. They'll come out and they will say, you've changed the way I think about my life, and I'll get there at the end. So the light, as it were, creates its own vessels to contain the light. It's a poetic metaphor, we can't make sense of it. And at a certain point, the light, the 10 vessels that are created, they're called the kelim vessels. The 10 vessels that are created, the light overpowers the vessels in the Lurianic. The lower 7 vessels especially crack and break. This is called Shivirat HaKeli. The upper 3 vessels, we'll call them for our purposes Keter, Chokmah, and Bina. Always remember that Sephirotic names are labels. They don't identify the interior meaning of a Sephirah. So, for example, the Sephirah of Chokmah, wisdom, if you study that Sephirah, it is not about wisdom. It's a generative geometric point. It exists, but it doesn't exist. But from it, reality can proceed over into Bina, which is either quarry. So Binah does not mean discernment and understanding, what the word means in Hebrew, but the interior of the Sphirah, you might say, is the beginning of a ramified universe. Okay, so always remember, the labels of the Sphirah are not the content of the Sphirah. So the upper 3 Sphirot, Keter, which is the interface between the infinite and this world, Chokmah and Bina, they stay relatively intact, according to the Lurianic myth. The lower 7 crack and break. So they crack and break into shvarim, into shards, as it were, and they fall into and create the lower world, meaning our world. So our world is constituted by the broken shards of divine consciousness. So even though this is a Neoplatonic scheme of a divine unfolding, all this is happening within the mind of God. We don't get to our world until we get to the very lowest Sphira, called Shekhinah and Malkut, both of them. And under that is our world. So this is not an unfolding into our world, it's an unfolding in the mind of God. So what we're actually witnessing here is the shattering of the mind of God. So this is the idea of the shattered God. Okay, the God that has undergone a breakage. Now, when we understand that God has undergone a breakage, the sensitive soul already gets, how shall I say, an intuition of what's coming. We're here to heal God. So this inverse of why didn't God take care of me? Why did God allow this disease to happen? Why do these things happen? God doesn't cause it. God is broken. Okay? There's another force coming in, which you might say is opposed to the divine. The divine, in some ways, is incapable of stopping what is called the Sitra Achra, the other side. And so we human beings have to strengthen and repair the 7 lower sefirot. They're sometimes called the psychological sefirot, meaning we work with them in the inner life of the human being. Okay. Now, the upper 3 are the mufshatim, the abstract, for people who do meditative work. That is where you go. It's available, but it takes some meditative skills. Most people stay in the lower 7, which is inner life sefirot, which means you work on them by working on your own inner life. As I work on my inner life, I am repairing the divine. And especially how this gets expressed in the interpersonal world. So how do we effect tikkun hakelim? It's also tikkun ha'olam, by the way. Kabbalah uses the term tikkun olam. It doesn't mean social action. It means repairing the divine. Okay, so the shards fall into and create a lower world, and then they are encased in what are called klipot, or husks. So our world, you can say our starting place, when a person wakes up to themselves, ideally sometimes in their teenage years, they're aware that they have a life, a journey. They may not have the word for it, that they have a soul, and that something's wrong. Okay, goals, right? It's a very deep Hasidic idea. You awake and you realize you're estranged. You're awake and you realize that you're double, you're duplicitous. That everybody's duplicitous. Nobody knows themselves. Now, some kids, high school kids, they don't know anything about this. Right? They go from one club, one thing to the next, they go to college, and everything is great. I was not one of those kids. I was one of those kids who was 14, 15 years old. I knew there was something wrong. I was reading existentialism at a young age. Right? And it spoke for me and to me, but it just left me with this existential gap of living in a world that is inherently meaningless, and any meaning that we create is our projection into the world. So that was my high school years. In many ways I tried to address it, and I know that I had other people that felt the same thing. We read existentialism together, and we looked at everybody else and thought to ourselves, you guys don't get it? And we're all in exile. There's a gnawing darkness here, eating at the soul. No, I don't get it. Well, some people get it, right? And some people who get it become rabbis and spiritual leaders, because what they're doing is they're trying to heal their own darkness and brokenness and try to bring that to other people. So one thing I want to offer you for High Holidays is there are people there who are acutely aware of the brokenness of the human condition, the brokenness of other people, and may feel some kind of existential despair. They're not just lonely, they're existentially in despair. And as I've worked with people who are suicidal, I remember one conversation in particular, a 19-year-old guy says to me, here I'm paraphrasing a poem by Roger Brodigan. He says, if I were 15% smarter, 15% better looking, 15% less weight, I might succeed and get a girl. He says, I will never compete. My future is working at a record store, never getting the girl, never making it until the day I die. And why live this thing out? And he said to his parents, he says, what's in store for me? You know I'm not that smart, and I'm not that attractive, and you know that I'm overweight, and I look at the competition out there, I can't get into one of these good schools. Parents said, what all they remember, this is LA. You got to get into the good school. Well, he couldn't get into the good school. So he's by definition an abject failure, disappointment to everyone around him. Right? So he attempted suicide. Now, he's not the first person who attempted suicide, and I work with a person, this is what I talk about. You are experiencing the brokenness of God. There are divine sparks in the depths of your soul covered by klipot. And the Sitra Achra, which is this opposing force of darkness and destruction, There's a battle for your soul. It's not about getting the job, getting the college, getting the girl. It's about who's going to win the battle for your soul. I said, you've been drafted to the front lines of the battle for the soul. You thought you were a supply clerk. You're just going to sit this thing out. No, you are actually now front-line infantry, right? The thin blue line between the barbarian hordes and the purity of your soul. So now you have a question. Here's the question. Are you going to stand up? So I use a martial image because that's a martial background. But there is a sense of spiritual warriorship here, because when you wake up to the Sitra Achra, and you wake up to the darkness and the power that gets Hara, it is martial. There's a war on. And Rabbi Brachman says, you have to learn Taxi say no Haman. Now, if you don't know what it means to be at war with the darkness and the Yetzer Hara and the Sitra Achra, good for you. I mean, really, God bless you. Right? Yeah, but if you're one of those people who feels those things, and you say, what are the Taxi say no Haman? What are the battle strategies to fight the darkness and the Sitra Achra and the Yetzer Hara? And someone says, I don't know, go see a therapist. Right? I think as clergy, we are, in a way, just abdicating our role, right, for that particularly sensitive kind of soul. And there are a lot more of them than we possibly can imagine. I worked here for 5 years, and I gave a sermon like this my first year. Okay? And my professors told me, don't do it. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And my response was, I can talk down to them, or I can lift them up. Okay? So I decided to use this terminology and explain it as well as I can, but not teach simple things, teach complex things in the most simple way that I could. So here's what happened after I gave the sermon. I get phone call after phone call after phone call. Remember the little blue phone call stickers we used to... Okay. I'm the only person in this congregation who understands what you're saying. Thank God. Now, after I got 70 of these, okay, so I got to do something. And I went to Rabbi Zilman and I said, can I create a study circle of people who want to study these kinds of things? He says, absolutely. We'll put it in the newsletter. You go do it. And I mean, it was great. He said, there's enough for everybody. And it was an incredible experience putting this out there and watching dozens of people come and say, teach us this. If no one's teaching, I didn't learn it in rabbinical school. I mean, this was not taught in any Jewish institution in which I studied. So now we're in a position where the shards of the divine, so the sparks, are hidden in husks. And the sentient human being can feel it. You feel a spark, you somehow not connected, and you learn there's a husk around the spark. Now, so where do people feel this? In relationships. And people love each other, and it's just not happening. They misunderstand each other. The communication goes bad. Animosity develops. Parents and their children. They can't seem to square things away. There's just toxicity in the house. And people don't understand it. And they say, what's wrong with us? And so one thing I say based on this is, you haven't discovered what's wrong with you. You've discovered your life's work. Your family is experiencing the husks and the spark in an acute way. There's nothing wrong with you. It's that the battle of the human condition has landed in your house. Okay? So now the question is, are you going to conduct this struggle, as it were, against the Sitra Achra, against the Yetzer Hara? You know, sometimes see the Yetzer Hara as the personal instantiation of the Sitra Achra. The Sitra Achra is cosmic. The Yetzer Hara is, a global war privatized. It's happening in you. It's happening in your spouse. It's happening in your kid. You're all getting sucked into it. And the question is somebody going to wake up and say, there's nothing wrong with us? Something is infecting our souls. Something is infecting the environment. Can we fight it off? So the first place that I start in all of this is the other side of my life, something called wisdom work, which is very much rooted in, take some of my classes, right? Is I used to call it spiritual psychology. I used to call it wisdom work instead, because it's kind of part of this, what I teach. like a family suffering, I say to them, okay, so I'll tell you what's going to happen. After everybody gets to bed for 10 minutes, right? Everybody gets to bed for 10 minutes. My wife this, and my husband this, and my kids this, and they're so horrible, everybody's horrible. I say, okay, so here's what I need you to do. I need you to, for now, explain more later, to commit to me that you will not criticize, complain, condemn, or engage in escalating conflict. And I lay out exactly what it means. So why do I need to do it? Why don't they do it? Because you're here. You're the person in front of me. I can train you. I can't train them. Well, you wouldn't believe what they say. I said I believe everything you say. The question is how are you going to respond? You see, when a person is speaking from their husk, you can speak from your husk and strengthen husks. Or if a person is really lashing out at you, you can say, I get it. I see you're really hurt. I think I have an apology to make. Right? You're not defensive, you're not aggressive back, you just say to yourself, I'm not going to make it worse. Right? Now this is a toxic no come on. No criticizing, no complaining, no condemning, accusing, blaming, labeling, etc. No escalating conflict, because this is what's happening. What's happening is the klipa has taken over your consciousness, and you brought out the klipa in their consciousness, and there's this klipa taking over the house, and you can say to yourself, there's actually a divine spark. There's actually a divine spark. And I'm not letting the klipa take over my soul, and I'm not going to hose down the people in my family with my klipa. Well, what if they do it? It doesn't matter what they do. Because you're the person in front of me. Now, I'm softer than I'm saying now. I try to walk people into it. In the classes that I teach, which are highly populated by people who really get this idea, they ask the same questions every single class. This is our title. After the first couple of years teaching this, I've never heard an original question. It's the same question over and over and over again. I've developed pretty good, I'm going to say really good answers. Because, once I lead the person into they say, okay, I get it. You're right. I say, so the question is not, should I do this? The question is, I'll say it bluntly to you, do I have the moral character to sustain it? I know what I should do. I know what I shouldn't do. So when you say, I can't, I said, I get it. You need to be trained. You need training. Everybody needs training. That's one thing I offer in my program is constant training in these skills. So on one hand, it looks like virtue work, which means don't make things worse. Make things better if you can. At the deeper level is Hasidic, Lurianic, spiritual psychology, which is how to not allow the husks to take over your consciousness and the consciousness of other people, and have it take over the interpersonal space. And by the way, it happens in institutions. It happens on boards. It happens everywhere, and people just get sucked into it, anger, defensive,ness, and back and forth. And sometimes you have one person in the world that says, can we just breathe for a second? This is not who we are. We're all better than this. Right? And then the process of tikkun can happen, which means releasing the sparks. Now, releasing the sparks means a husk has been broken. And this is where the metaphor runs out. Something in consciousness, as it were, is beyond the husk and spark. It's outside the husk and spark. That's the Rishimu. That's the vapor of God left behind. Just enough for you to say, this is not right. This is not right. So if you take a moment, you take a breath, try to imagine you're breathing in divine vapor, and say, there's a spark stuck inside that husk, and I'm going to rescue that spark. Okay? Now, you rescue the spark, you break the husk, the spark goes up, and as we begin to repair the divine is becoming repaired because we are breaking husks. So sometimes there's a moment, this is what happened when I would mostly work with people in 12-step programs. I would say, you haven't discovered what's wrong with you. You've discovered your life's work. Alcoholism is a way not to feel the pain of the husks. I say, yeah, it's very painful. Every person suffering from addiction is suffering from pain. And they don't know how to make the pain stop. That's why they drink and take drugs. Okay? And I take a deep breath and say, you got to get above the pain and realize that the craving is the spark surrounded by a husk. It's craving. The question is, can you find a way to reduce the craving from a spiritual way? So, And this is, I teach 12 steps differently from the standard, but this is an essentially 12-step approach, which is your starvation, your hunger is a spiritual starvation and hunger, and the lie of the Yetzer Hara is I can assuage it with whatever the addiction of the day happens to be. Okay? So when a person says, I'm craving alcohol, I say you're craving for the pain to go away. You're craving meaning, you're craving purpose. The husk is leading you astray. The question is, can you connect yourself to the Rishimu? Can you break the husk? Can you feel the release of the spark? By the way, I assume some of you have done this either consciously, purposefully, or intuitively. When a spark gets released, you actually can feel it in your body. You feel it in your body. When you let go, you have a moment of reconciliation with the person, like your whole body relaxes. You go, hey, let's just drop that thing. Sure. Let's reset. I remember, in my house, my kids' rooms were right above my office. So I get a sensitive phone call, I hear clop, bang, right? And I said, okay, guys, I gotta read it, keep it down. And so the 15 stairs between the bottom floor and the top floor saved my being. A horrible parent. Not saying I was great, I was good enough. But I walked up those stairs thinking to myself, what do I want them to remember about their dad? There's a husk. Climbed the stairs. And just by the time I got to the top of the stairs, I was a different person. Because I had 15 stairs. Okay, so in a way, I said, I'm not doing that thing. When I arrived at the top, we're going to get a whole different kind of conversation. And I could feel my physiology change. I could feel the nature of my inner life shift. I would knock on the door, and the door and say, oh my God, Daddy, you have a meeting. This is okay, you're kids. Sorry, all of you. That's not the guy who was at the top of the stairs. I was not that bad. I was at the top of the stairs. So the evidence of this on the interpersonal level is when one decides to take what I would call a virtue and wisdom approach, which is only the level of restraint. This is not deep, this is just restraint. Now, once you restrain, then you can go deep. So I'm going to give you an example that I just used this week. So a kid offended their parents, and the parents laid into the kid. They said, what should we do? Our kid is horrible. I said, well, he's an adolescent, so that's actually redundant. You can just stop the adolescent. I said, okay, he knows how to trigger you, got your number. They said, what do we do? I said, I'm going to give you a script, the first script. Memorize this. So okay, say, I heard you. Say, I heard you. And she heard it or her? That hurt. No, the T or the D, my ear. The kid said, you're disgusting. I hate you. I can't stand you. The parent says, wow, that hurt. That hurt. Well, they let them get away with it. I said, it's not what I said. I said, just say, wow, that hurt. I said, because you got a decent kid there. So I had them both in front of me. I said, what if your mom instead of yelling at you would have just said, that hurt? The kid would have said, I would have apologized. So the angry parent gives the kid no room for remorse, because when an angry parent creates a defensive shell. So see, you're not letting the kid get away with it. You're allowing their conscience to do the work, not your anger. I'm not saying it's a panacea. Just give it a try. Let them feel remorse. Give them the space to feel remorse. And they might that day or another day come and say, I was really out of line. I'm really sorry. Just thank you so much. Right? That can shift the nature of the relationship. Now remember, the anger is the klipa. That's what I try to teach you. It's what I call the 4 C's: criticizing, complaining, condemning, escalating conflict. Just tune that down. Breath. That really hurt. Let them do their work. So the virtue work is the spiritual psychology of this work. Now, yes. So my strong appeal to you, if you can give some version of this, that there's nothing wrong with you, something is happening to you, and it's quasi-external. And it's happening to your family, it's happening to your relationships. And not only when you do this work are you healing yourself and your relationship, you're healing God. Now, again, one thing that this addresses is the problem of theodicy. People say, how could this happen if there is God? Because God is broken and you're healing God. So if something horrible happens, you can do one of two things. Be angry at God, strengthen the Sitra Achra, make things worse, or you can put yourself on the front lines and say, this is horrible, and now I have my holy duty to do, which is create goodness in an evil world that is subjected to evil. So it's a two different ways to see it. All right, let me stop here. One more paragraph of thought, and there might be some questions out here. Yeah.
I mean, the basic question that I've always had with this construct is, why does this need to be the construct? Why do there have to be klipot? Why is there this lessening of density to bring in non-godness?
Right. So remember, this is all
which is a theodicy question,
yeah,
actually.
sure. Yeah. So the question is, why are things as they are?
Yes. But it is a question.
It's a great question. Why are things as they are? Okay. So Aristotle tried to answer it. There's a prime mover that got everything into motion.
Right.
And I can teach Maimonidean theory of creation, why things are as they are. No one buys it. It's not a satisfying answer. All right, so the world is run by an evil demon. That would actually make more sense.
Well, but Sitra Achra in some ways almost becomes that.
That's exactly right. That's the God that many people worship in secret. See, many people think they're Jewish and worship God. They actually worship Mars. If you watch how they talk to each other, they're worshiping the war god. They're not worshiping Yud-Heh-Vav. Because you know how I know what God someone worships? I watch how they treat other people. That's how I know what God they worship. Okay, so why are things as they are? My perspective, it's not a worthwhile question.
What?
Not a worthwhile question. I'm going to call it a spiritual theological cul-de-sac. Meaning we can spend a lot of time on it. I can give you many theories, but no one walks out of the room spiritually satisfied, because if we could answer that question, it would have been answered 3,000 years ago.
Right, but the person who is in some sort of crisis, that still is a question that they can't get answered.
Yeah, but see, their question is, why is God doing this to me? Why is God doing this to me?
Right.
I don't think that's going to provide any sense of spiritual healing. If they say, I've been brought on the front lines between a destructive force in the world and a force of holiness, and I'm the person holding the line on this place at this time, do I cave in and let the darkness conquer my soul or not? Now, this doesn't speak to everybody, clearly. But there's a certain group of people, when I say, okay, you are holding the line, there's darkness not only attacking your body, it's attacking your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, I say, I don't understand that. I say, okay, then this is the way I think. This is the way I conduct my own inner life. So as far as why are things as they are, I don't know. I woke up and a war was on. I don't know how this war got started, but I know there's a war on. So I don't have an answer to your question. So now that the question is, I knew there was a war on when I became conscious as a teenager. I didn't have the right metaphors for poetry until I studied Kabbalah. Then I had a language for the war. Okay. And then when I studied Hasidic literature, I knew how to fight the war. See, studying the RE did not give me the Taxi-Seichel. Okay. When I studied Baal Shem Tov and others, I got a sense of how to fight the war internally and how to reduce the toxicity between me and other people and try to bring some dignity and ability for us. Yeah.
So this is on very much an individual basis. We find ourselves individually between the destructive forces and goodness, and here we are, fighting that battle. How do we envision this, or can you take this to a wider level, not just as individuals, as looking at the world? Yeah,
so see, there are, for example, when we talk about the reforms, when I look at, I'm agnostic on the legal reforms because I don't actually think they're the issue, which is Rabbi my things. But I don't want them. Here's some core things in the Jewish tradition. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim. These and these are the words of the living God. So you have respectful discourse with the other side. That's not what the protesters have done. You understand? They say no discussion, no compromise. We will not talk to these people. That's not Jewish. See, there is a Jewish path. Second thing is no lashon hara. Calling another Jew a fascist and calling a thriving democracy a dictatorship, that's lashon hara. That's misleading. It's something, but it's not that. You see what I'm saying? So there are rules in place. There are rules in place. And again, I'm agnostic on whether what these reforms are, but I know there are rules in place. And if people follow these rules, the crisis wouldn't be there. See, the crisis isn't the law. The crisis is the response to the passage of the laws. So what if everybody calmed down, said no lashon hara, elu the elu, and everybody followed Jewish ethics? We wouldn't be here. So what would I say to people? Study your ethical tradition and live by your ethical tradition, and then let's see what happens. Now, that's what I say to everybody. Most things in the world, aside from some real evil corners of the world, can be solved by following Jewish ethics. Jewish ethics in general. But Jewish ethics has a very strong focus on engaging the other in responsible discourse. That's a very strong Jewish ethic. And if you want to read the philosopher on this, Jürgen Habermas. So like, if I feel like Jürgen Habermas studying Talmud, because the Talmud is so representative of the idea of sustained discourse between people who disagree. Because it's what, as it were, what the divine wants. The second thing is the absolute intolerance for lashon hara. You know, people say to me, yeah, lashon hara laws are important, but not in this case because they are so particularly evil. I said, I looked it up. I don't see that. I don't see the clause that says, but this political opponent actually is so awful that I can dispense with the laws of lashon hara. I said, if you can show me a line in Jewish ethical literature that says you're excused if it is those people. Okay? So even with people that I really hate, I describe a behavior I don't throw away. I said, I'll describe a behavior, but I'm not going to throw away. So that's a way that I think, and as Rabbi Finley said, whatever is happening in Israel to work this thing through, this is what they're doing. They're no longer throwing labels at each other. They're saying, okay, so where exactly are we disagreeing? Let's stop with the name calling. Let's stop with the shrill behavior. Let's stop with the accusations. Let's stop with predicting the future. I watched the hearing of the Supreme Court in Israel when the plaintiff to stop the reform, he goes in and he says, and if the Chief Justice, whom that's what does not like, she said, this is a court of law. There's no ifs here. So legal factual arguments make your argument. Like he went, whoa, someone just told me to stick to facts and legal theories, which I don't think it looked like he had never been put in that box before. I thought if anything good comes from this, it's people talking responsibly and holding decorum like the judges in the Supreme Court. However they decide. The best thing that happened to me is they arrived in court. Okay, that's from my perspective. See, if there is something to do. And that's something that we can preach. I think we can preach if we all follow the laws of Jewish discourse. And if people followed it, so many things in the world would be better, including our own families, all the way. Right, any other questions about yes?
I'm no expert on Musar, but there's this notion that the work of life is to transcend what I might otherwise call primal impulse or more primal basic desire, because God is less found in that than in with self-restraint and cultivating characteristics and virtue and so forth.
Correct.
Is that, would you say, a metaphor parallel to?
Absolutely. In fact, when you look at the so-called ethical will of Baal Shem Tov, which he did it right. His students culled through the records of his statements and they organized it. The very first paragraph says, here's the first thing he says, the main problem is shikha, it's forgetfulness. Shikha, forgetfulness. That's the main problem. The very first lines of it, almost done?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay? Next thing he says is, study Musar every day. Now, many people would say, consider spontaneity and joy and Musar down from Solomon. The first line of the ethical will of Baal Shem Tov, the first paragraph says, the problem is forgetfulness, study Musar every day. Okay? So, yes. Now, what Hasidus gives, because I have studied Musar deeply, I've taught Musar, what it doesn't give is a theology. What is it? What is the theology of inner work? So for me, the teachings of the Ari is the most precise theology of inner work, because when I do inner work, which Musar is, which then translates into interpersonal work, okay, I'm breaking husk, releasing sparks, and if I hold this, then you can look and say, oh, so you're not a threat. No, I'm not a threat. I want to get through this. And you can say, okay. So I may have been an inspiration for you to break the husk. And if I get really agitated, you say, Finley, there's no problem here, man. It's like, let's just calm down. So I go, wow, thank you. You helped me break the husk and release the spark. Okay, so Musar for me is the tactical dimension for me of Hasidic, Lurianic spiritual psychology. That's how it's defined, but I think I'm going to teach a course on Musar as the tactical dimension of Lurianic psychology. Like that.
Strategy.
You know, it's like, I don't understand Luria, I'm just going to do Musar. I say, hey, if you could just Musar without Luria, good for you. But, you know, look, I remember when I was a latecomer to music, so I was learning how to play bass guitar because I only had 4 strings. And so as I'm learning bass guitar, I said, so why does that? He goes, okay, you want to study music theory, find a different teacher. I'm teaching how to play bass guitar. Some people just want to learn the string. That's Musar. Some people, they're just by their nature say, can you give me the theory behind why this chord progression creates this mood? Okay, now you're studying Lurianic Kabbalah. So you don't need that. Learn how to play your instrument. You do need it. Here's the music theory. Yes, please.
Just want to come back, I think, as you started, Mordecai, you were saying that the Baal Shem Tov found that there were limits to Lurianic, this Lurianic, and moved into a realm of teaching through Tshuva.
Tshuva, Musar, and one last thing I'll talk about in 2 minutes, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that was really my question.
Okay, so when I
asked the limitation.
Yeah. So in the collection of the Baal Shem Tov statements that have been organized into Parsha, he goes to Genesis 6:8, where God says to Noah, put a sohar in the teva. Okay. Now, the Hebrew word teva means a container. It also means an orthographic word, like Rashi Tevot. So the Baal Shem Tov says, no, that means, it's called a deck light. When you have in the old days when they had ships and you don't light a fire, you put a prism on the deck, and the deck prism shined the lower compartments. So it's like, put a deck light on the ark, or put a tzohar on the word. Same Hebrew. Now, when you put a tzohar on the word, and you look down inside the word, I brought that. If you want the Hebrew, I'll give it way out. Says, what do you see there? Worlds and souls and angels. Olamot nefashot malachim. And then he changes it. He says, and when you bring your consciousness to it, into the teva, and he focuses on Sidur and Torah, nothing more complex. You can say you study the Zohar. You go in there, you enter that world. So it's like your light of your consciousness goes into that world, and it's transformative, but you both transform the inner light of the Word, and then you are transformed as well. Now, that's a more meditative thing. But he uses this to replace the complex Lurianic Kabbalah. He says, you want to engage, you want to do some Lurianic Kabbalah, forget about it. But I will tell you what kind of meditations are absolutely transformative. Take one word of the Siddur. Take one word of the Siddur. Put your deck prism into it. Look inside and see souls and angels and world and Elohut and the divine sink into it. So people say, okay, which word? Which word? Atah. Okay, time's up.